everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of the ACCN podcast. I am Shivani.
And I'm Cassandra. And today we'll be talking about regenerative agriculture in the global south.
So today we're joined by someone very exciting. We have Ariana, who is the founder of Forested, an Ethiopian-based company on a mission to conserve the world's most biodiverse ecosystems around the global south. So I guess today's conversation will be an interesting insight into how Ariana started her entrepreneurial journey, which I always think is very exciting when I speak to founders, all the great things that Forested is working on, and I guess how Forested is also creating direct and indirect jobs. So yeah, over to you, Ariana, to introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you, Cassandra and Shivani, for having me. So as Shivani mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Forested. What Forested is an ingredients insets marketplace. So essentially what we are building is a platform for regenerative agriculture, specifically regenerative ingredients. We work with global consumer brands, starting with cosmetics companies, and give them access to ingredients that are more climate friendly, more nature positive, and more socially impactful. So we're actually still a little bit early in our journey into kind of the classic marketplace model. We started in 2019, but started our first few years actually building a conservation-oriented trading company in Ethiopia. So we built a network of over 1,000 smallholder farmers who are essentially land stewarding 4 different incredibly biodiverse forest ecosystems in the southwest of Ethiopia, train them on regenerative agriculture, specifically better honey production. We have a factory in Ethiopia where we process bee products like honey and beeswax and then ultimately export them to these consumer brands. And so, that was really the inspiration for kind of growing into a marketplace model where we realized that in a platform model, we could, grow our impact on jobs, on being able to protect many more hectares of land by being able to connect many more ingredients from lots of different producers across East Africa to global markets. And as a platform model, we're, still agricultural trade is still, the bread and butter of what we do, but we're now building out these kind of platform solutions related to carbon insetting opportunities and being able to unitize and help monetize the environmental impact of regen ag, as well as innovative financing mechanisms. And then of course, capacity building for both corporates with ambitious net zero and other ESG goals, as well as for agribusinesses and small, medium enterprises who also work with smallholder farmers.
Wow. Very exciting. I want to know everything about forest and how you started. But before we do, I know we've mentioned this, but you're in regen agriculture. And I guess let's start by defining what is regenerative agriculture and how is Forested playing a very key role within the sector.
Yeah, and I think regen ag has definitely been a hot word, especially in the past few years. I think it helps to kind of define regenerative in the context of sustainability. And the way I would define regenerative versus sustainability is kind of like maintaining the status quo of what's happening. And, really we're at a point with our natural resource management in the world where we have kind of extracted natural assets to the point of, a more rapid demise. And so regenerative implies that you're leaving land and ecosystems and communities in a better place than when you even started. And so what regenerative agriculture is a holistic kind of land and ecosystem management approach that can mean lots of different things. There are lots of different principles behind regenerative agriculture that needs to be designed in context of a landscape. So a lot of the times it'll imply topsoil regeneration, biodiversity abundance, improving ecosystems, managing water cycles better, renewing energy, even capacity building for communities. So you can imagine how regen ag practices need to be designed in the context of communities and landscapes. And so I think what's exciting about regenerative agriculture is it's a really critical nature-based solution to climate. And it kind of implies this kind of intersectional approach that is inclusive of communities and also the environment. And so where forested plays in regen ag is we're basically trying to scale it up. I think there's been a lot of investment in regenerative agriculture, and a lot of the most successful, and when I say successful, I mean kind of commercially viable solutions are done at commercial scales. And I think it's been really challenging to figure out where these kind of more rural fragmented supply chains of smallholders, especially in the African continent, can kind of get to a commercial viability. And so in doing a lot of our work building supply chains at Forested, and even a lot of our team's experience with supply chains before Forested, we realized that there needs to be a lot more support and facilitation between land stewards who are practicing regen ag and finding markets that actually can pay for regenerative agriculture.
Wow, very exciting. And before we move on, but you also mentioned carbon insetting. So I think people have heard of carbon offsetting.
Yeah.
What is carbon insetting?
Yeah. So carbon. So I guess comparing offsetting and insetting. Insetting is when companies actually reduce their carbon footprint by investing in their supply chain. So insetting is a way for companies to actually work on reducing their scope 3 emissions. And one of the reasons why we were really interested in insetting as opposed to offsetting, and obviously I will hold my thoughts on the offsets world, but a majority of consumer packaged goods and really more broadly, like nature-based industries, most of their carbon emissions are coming from scope 3. So when you look at consumer packaged goods companies, something like over 80% of their carbon emissions are scope 3, more than 90% of their impact on land is also in supply chains, and then over 75% of their impact on jobs is also in supply chains. And so, as companies set these really ambitious and really great, net zero, nature positive, and social impact goals, there's really no way that they could ever offset their way to these goals. They really need to be investing in reducing their carbon footprint, regenerating landscapes and communities in their supply chains.
Wow. I mean, that's very interesting. Yeah,
I
didn't know about that until
I guess this is why these conversations are important, because I've only ever been hearing about offsetting. I haven't yet come across the term insetting. So thanks for sharing that with us.
No problem. It's definitely it's an emerging space. And I think, at Forested, we're really trying to help everyone win from the supply chain carbon reductions work that they're doing. I think what's been really encouraging is that I do see corporates putting their money where their mouth is. And, I see a lot of people, and when I mean people, I mean like, executive teams and corporates either shifting or creating new funds specifically for insetting in addition to offsetting. And if they are, a nature-based industry, which we define as a company where their core product or service relies on natural assets, we see them even, shifting their offset budgets to insetting. Like really carbon offsets should only be used by companies who are so ambitious about reaching their net zero goals that they actually have to find good quality offset projects to invest in as they work their way towards insetting. Insetting is really how a lot of nature-based companies will have to kind of sustainably build these net zero companies.
Wow, that is amazing, and I'm glad Forested is right up there with this new trend of carbon insetting rather than offsetting. Cool. I mean, my other question is, we were just chatting before this, but you have a very interesting background, obviously not from Hong Kong, then moved for jobs to Ethiopia, set up company in Ethiopia, and now, I guess, expanding into Kenya. I mean, what made you decide that you wanted to become an entrepreneur in the first place? What made you decide that Forested was where you wanted, what you wanted to do? I guess, yeah. And did you come from a climate background when starting this whole journey of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I tell people all the time, even though I now identify as an entrepreneur, I think building Forested was never about being a founder and definitely not about being a CEO. I really look forward to the day where I grow and build enough of the foundations where we can probably bring in, a CEO, and then we can a CEO who can really take us to the new levels. I mean, I definitely want to be in forested for the rest of my career, but for me, starting forested was more inspired by designing and building a solution to biodiversity loss and climate change. And so I think it all kind of stems back to when I first moved to Ethiopia, which was 9 years ago, came on an initially kind of short-term contract volunteer basis with an incredible NGO called conserve that builds, they do a lot of work, but a lot of the actual projects that they do is build supply chains that are more inclusive of smallholder farmers, more environmentally friendly and increasingly more regenerative, and kind of get them to markets. And so worked with conserve for 3 years, did lots of cool stuff, kind of building more equitable regenerative supply chains for Nespresso, Mondelez, Diageo. And so kind of got a firsthand look at, the ways in which corporates were trying to more directly source in better ways, but then also really understood the challenges building rural supply chains, working with farmers, and also trying to design supply chains that were more environmentally friendly. And so a lot of I would say my introduction to climate was really through the lens of smallholder agricultural supply chains. And so just kind of doing the work on the ground, training farmers, talking to government stakeholders at field levels all the way to national levels, just realized that if we didn't do something about climate, all of the landscapes and the jobs in these landscapes just would no longer be there if we didn't do something about it. So forested kind of emerged as this solution to realizing that, we continue to see tropical forests degraded and deforested very rapidly. You see people really struggling to, make a living. And if they're not able to make a living, then who's first to go? Natural assets. And so forested was really kind of inspired by this realization that there was a market player missing who could, understand the complexities of working with land stewards in rural landscapes like Ethiopian forests, but then also could understand the needs of and the workings of global corporates, and really build a business model where conservation could be the consequence of that.
Very cool. I mean, this is just cool overall. Yeah, we're like, wow, this is amazing.
No, but that's really important. Being able to take the initiative in terms of protecting the environment from the lens of entrepreneurship in a way that's sustainable. Because a lot of times I think we think, okay, let's fix it, let's put a band-aid, but how do we prevent it to start with? And I think it's important for, first of all, a company to come in, and second of all, a company in a cool space. We recently said climate is fashionable. Today we're saying climate is cool. Yeah. And it's really nice to be able to share this back with the community, ACCN, which is the Africa Climate Career Network, because we're trying to inspire young professionals to seek out opportunities that are both interesting and important to the sector. So your story is fantastic, and your company, I think, is doing an amazing job.
Thank you. We have a long way to go, but yeah.
We're here to help. We could segue into another question, just around, you've mentioned CEOing is tough. I don't know if anyone actively signs up to be CEO initially. It's a long journey, and many times it's very isolating in ways. But what are some of the more exciting things you've experienced as a CEO at Forested? And I guess your journey of building a team, building a strong team to help you achieve your goals. What's that been like?
So I think my favorite things about entrepreneurship, and I think specifically social entrepreneurship, is kind of realizing every day, including when things are hard, that I have my first choice career. I think being a CEO and the things that I think make being a CEO, or I guess being a CEO and certain skills I think the best CEOs have been a real struggle for me to build sometimes. And I think that conversation is a totally different chat. But, I still wake up every day and be like, wow, I can't believe I get to do this. How many people get their first choice career, and how many people are able to find something that they feel their life's worth can be dedicated towards. So that fulfillment is definitely one thing. I think the second thing is, by virtue of building something, you always have to collaborate. I mean, obviously in your teams with other stakeholders across sectors. And I think it's just been such a privilege to get to meet and work with a lot of really incredible people who are obviously working with you and collaborating because they're bought into the same mission. So I think that has really been a privilege. Yeah.
That's great. And what kind of skills do you look for as you build, I imagine, your first foundational team, and as you continue to expand? What are some of the important things you look for? Because a lot of times I imagine people won't have exact experiences in this space that we're in the type of company that you have. So what skills give you the sense of, yes, I could bet on this person for my company?
Yeah. So I'm actually working on this actively, just being able to be more clear on skill sets, because I think for the past few years, my focus has really been on qualities. So for me, attitude is kind of the first things I look for. Like, do they have a good attitude? I mean, building a startup, especially in an emerging sector, in the markets that we work in, it requires a lot of flexibility and a can-do attitude, a real scrappiness. And so that kind of flexible, positive attitude is number one. Second is a really great capacity to learn and an enthusiasm for learning. In a startup, we're bootstrapping and people just have to wear multiple hats. And so while, roles do need to be defined such that people feel like they have enough guidance to know how they can excel in their role, they need to be able to learn very quickly and be excited about that process.
Yeah, I agree. I come from a startup background myself, and a lot of times those types of attitude is really important. Having a growth mindset, being flexible about the experiences you're exposed to, being enthusiastic about those experiences, I think, and having the spirit of adventure to try, because a lot of times everyone else around you is also trying.
Yeah.
We won't know the answer straight away, but we're all here for the journey, and we're all here to learn what we need to do and to get things done. So some of the questions we get a lot of times is, how do I get into XYZ organization, or what kind of skills do I need to become X role or something like that? So through these conversations, also just trying to understand from an employer's perspective, what do you really look for? So to debunk that it's not a certificate and it's not an exact experience many times. I mean, sometimes it would be necessary, but I think you're right. A lot of times it's about your attitude and your willingness to learn.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think there's a time and place where you can be more skills-based in recruitment. I think that's where a shortlist comes in. But yeah, I think one thing that I've been trying to work on is like, how do you test for kind of general cognitive intelligence, that problem-solving skill set? Because there are a few skills that are relevant regardless of the role. But yeah, I mean, this is why like the recruitment and the HR is so important for startups, and normally a facet that feels hard to invest in-house in the beginning.
We're here to help.
I mean, you've been great and fun to work with. So I mean, Shortlist is always happy to help companies like Forested and beyond. And I guess, so speaking on to like, yes, individuals want to get into the climate space, like you've mentioned the skills, but what is the advice that you would give for people that want to join the climate sector, or maybe even want to join Forested? Like, what advice would you give them to be ready to join a team like yours?
I just have to emphasize, that learning. I mean, the space is changing so quickly. Even I have a hard time really keeping up with everything that's going on. I have 20 tabs open on my browser at any point because there's all these incredible, LinkedIn posts or articles about new approaches to nature-based solutions, and even just new regulations that are in the works or rolling out that all have a huge impact on how the climate space will evolve. So I would say just making sure that you're continuing to learn, whether that's reading podcasts, talking with people, being a part of networks. So I think there's lots of really great platforms that kind of share the latest and the greatest in climate. So, I mean, if you're based in Nairobi, obviously like the Nairobi Climate Network, there is, the lots of incredible substacks, like, the Climate Tech VC substack. There's Climate Hack. The World Economic Forum has a platform for innovators called Uplink, and many of their kind of pillars of support for Uplink are climate related. And then finally, for those really interested in nature, there's a really incredible VC committed to biodiversity and nature called Superorganism. They also have an incredible newsletter. But I would say just like making sure you're continuing to absorb information is really important, because if you learn, that process will kind of guide you to see where you want to play in the climate space.
Okay. We're going to check those out.
Yeah.
You've mentioned some resources I didn't have any idea about that I think would be great to share with ACCN and our young professionals. And so a different question, but related, is as you employ people to work at Forested, you also having a ripple effect through your work by creating jobs for farmers and CBOs in the work that you do. Could you speak a little bit more about the impact that your organization is having with the farmers and the communities that you work with?
So in version 1 of Forested's model, we had built a network of smallholder farmers who are all land stewards and a part of these participatory forest management groups across 4 different forests in Ethiopia's kind of broader southwestern areas. So the way in which we had an impact on jobs was less about creating new jobs and more about increasing their incomes by creating better paying markets for their various non-timber forest products. So kind of bee products, spices, really anything that's non-timber but in a forest. We also did a lot of training and kind of invited farmers who may not have been producing those commodities, like they might have been a coffee farmer but not produced honey before. And so also like kind of looking at creating additional and new revenue streams for farmers. And then, of course, we have direct impact on jobs where we set up a factory. We have people who work at the factory as well as in the office. So Forested in Ethiopia is about 21 people right now, mostly full-time. And so that was kind of version 1 of our model when we were a conservation trading company. But one of the reasons we were really excited about kind of evolving Forested from a trading company now more to a broader platform and marketplace is the potential to impact, an exponentially higher number of jobs and livelihoods and hectares of land. So in kind of version 2, we're now working with lots of other agribusinesses who look like Forested. They could also be professionalized farmer cooperatives and other forest management groups across East Africa, and working with them to strengthen the trade and production of other natural ingredients. So I think marketplace models are intimidating, but also really exciting because of that scaled up impact you can have.
Okay. I'm excited to see what the expansion into Kenya looks like. I do know we have a lot of beekeepers and other people in adjacent type farming activity. And regenerative agriculture has started picking up in the country as well.
Yeah.
Even in terms of forms of how people farm, techniques that they use, and all that. So it'll be really interesting to keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm curious though, in terms of like creating the marketplace, and this is my very limited experience of doing it with seaweed, is like, how do you do quality control? Because I'm guessing you're working with big cosmetic companies outside Kenya. They have very specific requirements in terms of the quality of whether it's honey, seaweed, and the regulations. How as Forested are you like tracking that?
Yeah. So our approach, at least in these early stages, is to really focus in on partnerships with global brands who genuinely are so excited about regen ag, which also then means they kind of have the patience and understanding to go through the journey with us as they regenerate their supply chains. And so something that's great about being an enterprise marketplace is with each client that we really form a partnership with, we can work with them on dozens, if not thousands of ingredients. And so normally the way it works is kind of starting market first until we really get to that, point of being a marketplace. Like, my vision is to be the Alibaba of regen ingredients, but kind of looking at all of their supply chains, starting with the most kind of, I guess, starting with the supply chains that have the most significant impact on climate, people, and nature, and then starting by regenerating those supply chains. And then on the kind of supply side, we have a database of well over 50 ingredients and small, medium enterprise agribusinesses, and we kind of have a ranking of their readiness to go to market with us. And so a lot of it starts with asking agribusinesses if they have the relevant kind of food safety or kind of FDA approved certifications or processes, asking about volumes, doing samples and testing. And so, our vision as we scale is to have a lot more capacity to increase the skill and commercial viability of SMEs and also their ingredients. But, starting out, we definitely kind of start with those that are a little bit more ready, but we see our impact being in be able to like close the gap between where SMEs are and their commercial viability.
Wow. Well, we've talked about all the great things Foresters has done, entrepreneurship, but I can't not go over the fact of how challenging entrepreneurship is, and it's not all rosy and green. I guess, what is some of the challenges that you have encountered and I guess like overcome? Like, I know I don't want to paint a picture that entrepreneurship is all great and amazing, and we know how much energy and effort CEOs and teams put into it.
I think bootstrapping kind of encapsulates what's hard about entrepreneurship, especially in the early stages. And I think like the challenges we had day one are still kind of the challenges today. So Forested I think Forested was incubated really back in 2017, but launched full time in 2019. And we've basically bootstrapped over the past like 5+ years. And I think it's something that I think maybe I was like ashamed of in the beginning, that we hadn't gone like the VC backed route. But I think today in this climate with the market, I'm actually really proud of what the team has been able to do by bootstrapping over the past few years. Because I think sometimes in the wave of traditional VC, we get really excited about growth and that hitting that like hockey curve stick of growth specifically, when being in kind of cash-strapped times like now, startups really just have to prove that they've got the business fundamentals down, or at least a clear path to that profitability. And so I think as a part of bootstrapping, you're constantly like, okay, I have this limited pool of resources. What do I spend it on? It's like, do I spend it on the inventory so that I can sell honey, or do I make sure I have like 3 more months of payroll? Or it's, so I think it's just like that constant decision making of like trade-offs. Like I wake up every day and be like, okay, obviously I'd like to do these 5 things, but I only have the resources to do 2. Which ones am I going to choose? And so I think that decision making process in a bootstrapping way, it builds great discipline, but that part is really hard and emotionally taxing. And obviously it has implications on people, whether there are stakeholders like the farmers or even like team members. Probably the second challenge, less taxing, is building something in such an emerging space. I think, we've been in the space of like agroforestry, regen ag, and climate for several years now. And it's really exciting to see more people, investors, government, the labor market get really excited. But I think especially from a fundraising perspective, it can be a bit tricky because you're talking to investors who want to invest in this space, but they're still building their knowledge base in it. And so there's just a lot of time you have to put into educating people, which is really important, but can also be kind of frustrating when you're out there looking for funds and support, and people to take that bet on you in this emerging space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I mean, you're pushing through and you seem to be doing amazing, amazing work with farmers on ground, expanding into countries. You're also a strong female founder, which, by the way, we should have more of, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a lot of gratitude to our team, like our angel investors and just like everyone who's bet on us since day one and up to now. So yeah, very grateful. I mean, you know, they say it takes a village, but for us, like that is absolutely like the only reason that we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And congratulations on bootstrapping for that time. And especially now when it's so important to have been able to demonstrate that you can survive as a business and pay your own bills. I know it's a change in the trend in terms of how things used to be done. So pioneering is important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Ariana, for taking the time to speak to us. I guess before I let you go from the spotlight, what is one piece of advice that you would give to individuals that are thinking about entrepreneurship and want to kick off their journey in entrepreneurship?
I would say just put yourself out there, get into the field or your version of being on the ground and test and build and iterate upon that process as quickly as possible. I think it's actually something I'm now trying to really instill within my own team is come into something with a hypothesis, kind of identify the cheapest and the quickest way to test it, get an answer, and then reiterate. I think a lot of times we can just be so paralyzed by like options and getting it right. And I think that's probably the most limiting kind of effect for people who really want to build something and build something of importance. So just really encouraging people to just put yourself out there. Like, don't wait for something to be 100%. I mean, unless you're going to a client where you have one shot, but yeah, just like test, build, iterate very quickly.
Awesome. Cassandra, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's amazing and really good advice, especially for our community who are looking at how can they bring their whole selves into either an organization or how can they contribute to climate action through starting their own thing or helping others who started their own thing. So we appreciate all the guidance that you provided today and also sharing your story.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate what Shoreless is doing in this space.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And hopefully those that are interested, maybe with working in forested as they expand in Kenya, maybe their jobs will be on the ACCN job board. We don't know, like as Ariana, actually, this is a live pitch where...
Yes, we look forward to seeing your applications.
Exactly. But yeah, thanks a lot for tuning in to this week's episode. As we say, like, subscribe, and share.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.